The time has finally come, my friends. The time we've been waiting for since the release of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door Remake. I, personally, have just been burning with curiosity, wanting to know how the game would sell. And Nintendo published their quarterly financial numbers, and we finally have our answer. The sales have been not great, not bad, not where I was hoping they would be. I'll say that. No, the sales are not quite as strong as I was hoping, but it's a scenario that I was kind of preparing myself for. I try not to get my hopes up too much, and it really is kind of like skirting that line. Any less would be a disappointment, like a really big disappointment, and then any more would be more in line with maybe it was wishful thinking. I don't know, but like it's really in the middle there. It's not great, but it's not bad. The data tracks through to the end of the fiscal year at the end of June, and so Thousand Year Door released at the end of May, so you had those few days there, plus all of June. So this is about a 5 or 6 week period here, and within that period, it sold 1.76 million units. And kind of compare that to other recent Nintendo releases. Luigi's Mansion 2 HD sold 1.19 million units, and that released at the end of June, so that was only in a few days, so that's pretty good for just a few days, so that game is selling pretty alright. And then we didn't get new info on Princess Peach Showtime. The last time we got info, the game had launched, and the data we had said it was something like 1.22 million or something. But Nintendo only gives sales updates for games that I believe that hit another like million milestone within that fiscal year. So it stands to reason that Princess Peach Showtime did not cross the 2 million mark, and that's why we've not gotten new numbers. So it seems that sales there have maybe stalled a bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if Luigi's Mansion 2 ends up crossing the 2 million mark during the next quarterly report. So back to Paper Mario, 1.76 million. Yeah, it's really not great. You know, early impressions of the game were really good, the reviews were really good, and early sales data suggested that it was tracking along with Mario RPG Remake and Origami King. That's really, like, that's the kind of the standard I was hoping that it would maintain. The other Mario RPGs on the platform, Super Mario RPG and Origami King, sold very, very similarly. And so, like, even if I didn't think Thousand Year Door was going to sell like 10 million units or whatever, I was hoping it would at least track along with those, just kind of proving that there is a market for Mario RPGs of all kinds. And obviously, it's Thousand Year Door. Been talking it up forever and saying if Nintendo would only release it again, then they would see that there is a, you know, there's a market for this kind of game. And this isn't to say that there isn't a market for that kind of game, but that's the real disappointment there, was that it didn't at least track along with those games, even though at first it seemed like it was going to. That's the real bummer. It really felt like it was going to. It seemed like it was on track to at least match those games or come pretty close. But not even crossing the 2 million mark after that long of a period after launch, that does hurt. Even hitting that 2 million milestone would have definitely helped. And it's still early. You know, the game could continue to sell. I wouldn't be surprised if it crossed 2 million during the next, you know, by the next quarterly report. It is possible, but this period of time that is measured here is pretty long. And we have seen time and time and time again that Nintendo games, you know, if anything other than the really, really big system sellers, Pokemon, Zelda, mainline Mario, all that stuff, those games, they all have legs. But everything else seems to, like, come out, it kind of sells what it's going to sell, and then it just kind of stops. It just kind of falls off of a cliff, and, you know, smaller releases like this that Nintendo knew, like, it was never going to get millions and millions and millions in sales. Like, it was never going to happen. And this kind of title does tend to just kind of stop selling. The vast majority of people who buy these games do so pretty much right at launch or very close to launch. So 5 or 6 weeks after the game launched, 1.76 million sales, probably not gonna get a ton more than that. And I hate that. I really, really hate that that's the reality we live in. Just like logically, it makes sense to me that a game would continue to sell throughout the life of the Switch. More people buy the Switch, more people, you know, they work through their backlog and they just kind of eventually come around to it. But like those numbers are always so much smaller than I expect. And that's the bummer here. That's the thing, is that this game might have already sold 90% of the units it will ever sell. You know, even just in the first month, it might end up flagging pretty far behind Super Mario RPG and Origami King. And that's a shame, especially considering how much work Nintendo put into the game. You know, this wasn't just a simple upscaling. They did a full asset remake. They tweaked the game a bunch. Like, it's beautiful. It looks like a brand new game. I would hope that it would sell at least as well as the other actual brand new game, Origami King, on the same platform. But we do have to consider other things. Origami King might have sold more than it otherwise would have because it released a few months into the pandemic, and we saw how that affected video game sales. We certainly saw how it affected the sales of Animal Crossing and a lot of other games and game series across the whole entire industry. It could be that that number is a bit inflated, and then you also have the fact that Mario RPG released less than a year ago. Thousand Year Door is another big, meaty Mario RPG adventure, and it's coming not even a full year after the last one. And it could just be that, like, there's only so much room for that in people's lives, and you know, that might have affected sales permanently, or it may mean that it will have decent legs. Maybe eventually more people will come around to playing it once they've kind of, you know, waited a while and cleansed their palate of that Mario RPG adventure thing, and then they come back to it. And it is at least worth mentioning, worth bringing up the whole idea that there was a fair number of people who didn't want to buy the game because it ran at 30 FPS, and I'm not going to dredge up that whole argument here. But I do know that there are going to be some people who might look to that and say, that's why I didn't buy it, so I bet that's why a lot of people didn't buy it. Obviously there's no way to know for sure, but I do not believe that's the case. I really don't believe that that had a dramatic impact on the game's sales. That's just not the sort of thing that usually translates to poor sales. That's the kind of thing where it feels like a lot of people care, but I really do believe that this is the vocal minority just making a really, really big stink about it, because people who really do care about it, they take every single opportunity to remind everyone that they care a lot about it. And so I think this is one of those things where, sure, in these internet circles on Twitter, you know, comment sections of news sites and stuff, sure, you get a lot of people that way, but I think your average person, your average video game playing, money spending person is probably not even aware that this is an issue at all. You know, I just don't think so. If the game somehow magically ran at 60 FPS, because yes, it would take magic for all sorts of technical reasons that the people who are angry about the frame rate seem to conveniently gloss over. There are a lot of reasons why the game runs the way that it does. See, but this is just me okay, forget I said all that. It's just gonna cause the stupid arguments in the comments again. Point is, though, if it did run at 60 FPS, I don't think it would have made a difference. I really don't. I really do think it just comes down to the game itself and how much of a market there is or was for that game. And unfortunately, there just isn't as much of a market as I would like. Not terrible. Not terrible. I mean, it's almost guaranteed that it'll end up at 2 point something million by the end of its life. And then, you know, and if Origami King is 3 point something, and Super Mario RPG is 3 point something, and Thousand Year Door is 2 point something, it's not bad. However, you know what? It's hard to come to any, like, really solid conclusion here until we see what happens with Mario and Luigi. Because that's going to be our third Mario RPG big adventure within the span of a year. Still don't understand why Nintendo chose to do that. But I'm really, really curious to see how that goes. I don't know exactly what that, you know, whether that sells really well, whether it sells better than Thousand Year Door or the same or worse. I don't exactly know what that is going to say about all this. If it sells really well, then I might just say, okay, well, it could mean that people just are more interested in new games versus remade games, but then why did Super Mario RPG sell so well? I don't know. And then if it sells worse than Thousand Year Door or about the same, then I'll say maybe it is true that people are just a little bit full on Mario RPGs. Maybe if they had released Thousand Year Door in the place of Super Mario RPG and Super Mario RPG now, maybe their fates would have been reversed. We really don't know. And between the two games, between Super Mario RPG and Thousand Year Door, plenty of people like Super Mario RPG. Obviously, it's a classic. But it feels like more people are passionate about Thousand Year Door. That's the one that it feels like more people have wanted to push for. And so it is curious that Mario RPG sold more. And it could be that Paper Mario itself is just less appealing to the mass market than something like Super Mario RPG. Maybe just like looking at the box or something. The paper aspect, maybe there's just something about that, like psychologically, that makes most people, the people who are not already fans of this stuff, makes them just less inclined to buy it. That's also possible. But then at the same time, you look at the box art for Mario RPG, and it's weird. It's weird. The characters look very silly and weird, and I don't know why that would be more or less appealing than paper versions of these characters. I don't know, digging a little too deep into the psychology of it here. But yeah, basically, it's all just interesting. We've got so many Mario RPGs on the Switch now, and we're comparing the sales between them and trying to draw conclusions, and it's a little bit hard to draw conclusions. I really don't know what's up, and I'm not 100% sure why Thousand Year Door didn't sell better, and it's a bummer. It is a bummer. I will say, even if it's not a complete disaster, even if the game is not a failure by any stretch, it is just a bummer to see it flagging behind these other similar games. Because, you know, obviously, like, just fans of the classic Paper Mario style, we want to show Nintendo that these are the kinds of games that we want to see. And I can't be too disappointed, because it wasn't just about Thousand Year Door. I love Thousand Year Door, personally. I want to see it succeed. But Mario RPG, Super Mario RPG, that's basically the same thing. It's still like just a really solid turn-based RPG. It's got original characters and all that stuff. So like really, that game already has communicated that to Nintendo very, very well. And Nintendo has already shown a flexibility in this department where they spent years not having any flexibility here, feeling like Mario had to be really rigid and vanilla and lacking in creativity. But like now they've already gone back on that, and Mario RPG has already shown them, yes, we want more unique, original RPGs without weird gimmicks. So I can't be too disappointed. I guess the disappointment more just comes from my personal attachment to Thousand Year Door and all of the, you know, all of the campaigning that we all did together trying to get it remastered or remade or whatever. And yeah, and of course I have to be happy that it happened at all. And it's not a flop. It's not a failure. It did fine. Nintendo still made money on it. Maybe they'll even be happy with these sales numbers. Maybe it doesn't really matter that it didn't quite match the numbers of these other games. It doesn't really matter too much. Will I be bummed out if this does end up being mostly it, and it like barely crosses over the 2 million mark over the next like year or two, and that's just kind of it? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That'll be a bummer. Especially with the Switch's install base as high as it is. That's the other confusing thing. Is like you would think that as the years go on and more people get Switches, you would think that these games would just sell more and more and more and more because there's just such a humongous audience. So even a small percentage of that audience buying a game can equate to a lot of sales. So it's weird when you have a game that came out when the Switch was only a few years old and it sells this much, and then the Switch has sold like triple the number of people are playing the Switch, and then a game only sells this much. And it's like, what is that though? That's weird though. Why does it sometimes feel like it doesn't matter if a console sells like 30 million units, 100 million units, 140 million units? A lot of these games just end up selling about the same amount, as long as they're I mean, we're getting a little deeper here. Like, as long as a game is seen as kind of a niche series with a very particular audience, there does seem to be a ceiling for, like, how well it can do. Whereas if you want a game to really break out, it's got to be one of those games that people can just pick up when they go and get their thing at the store. You know, you go to the store and you want to buy a bunch of games. What are you going to get? You're going to get the 3D Mario. You're going to get Mario Kart. You're going to get Mario Party. You're going to get the latest 3D Zelda. You're going to get Smash. Maybe you'll get Splatoon. But then beyond that point, you might not pick up a lot more. Whereas, like, the kind of people playing these Mario RPGs might be a little bit more niche. You're getting a lot more of the people who were already fans of these things, and that is a bummer of an idea, too, even if you do look at the bigger successes of Origami King and Super Mario RPG. Considering how well Mario games have the potential to sell, I am bummed for both of those games that they've not sold more. 3 million is not bad, either, but it's also not, like, great, you know? It's not, like, really, really super good. It's not like Luigi's Mansion 3, inexplicably selling, like, what is it at, like 10, 15 million or whatever by now? Like, that's good. That's a breakout success. Those are the kinds of numbers that you want to see when you've got an install base this massive. But then there's also something to be said for, as a system ages, people get a little bit less excited for each release. Sometimes just coming out near the end of a console generation itself kind of deflates that hype and just gets people buying less. You know, there were plenty of good games that hit the 3DS at the end of its life, but the fact that it was the end of its life made people just kind of They're just kind of like, I don't know, Switch is coming. They're just not super interested in this anymore. And it could be that we're seeing a little bit of that. If Switch 2 is coming next year and now we, like, officially know it, then, like, yeah, maybe there's just fewer people buying loads and loads of games. I don't know. This is just endless wave of speculation on my part. I suppose I should wrap this up. I'm gonna keep rooting for Thousand Year Door. I'm gonna hope that it continues to sell and maybe creeps its way up toward, maybe even if we're lucky, past that 3 million mark. Not really getting my hopes up, but I don't know. Crazier things have happened.